Hello and welcome in to another edition of Huber and Friends. I'm Jeremy Huber and lucky enough to be joined by a guy who I haven't talked to in a while, but we were good buddies back in the day. John Maginnes, former PGA Tour player and Mr. Golf broadcaster. He's all over the place. Sirius XM PGA Tour Network with his show Katrick and Maginnes on tap. Also with his coverage of the PGA Tour via radio, via TV, and online. John, thank you so much for joining Huber and Friends.
You know what? I'm thrilled to be a friend there, Jeremy. Thanks for having me.
So here's the easy softball. How do we meet?
At Sirius XM. How many years ago was that? 2005?
So I got there in 2007. I was doing the Peter Kessler show. I was doing that. And then, of course, I ended up doing some coverage stuff and met you there. And I'm trying to think a couple of good memories. One of the ones I think it was you. It sounds like a you story. I was the producer role, and I didn't make a lot of money. Actually, no, I was doing scorecards and producing. They had me doing both. And at one point, we decided we're getting pizza for everybody. And you walk up and go, "Hey, man, put your money in on the pizza." And I'm like, "Hold on a second. I'm a producer too. I'm not making any money here." But I was like, "Well, I can't disappoint Maginnes." But again, so that was one of the other one that I remember very well was. It was one of the really big snowstorms here in DC. I think we all got stranded for about 4 days in the hotel. And I remember the night before, I believe you and I think we were, they closed the bar super early. And you said to me, "Hey, they've got bars at the concierge. If I buy you one, you stay up and have another beer with me?" I'm like, "Of course." And the reason, John, wasn't just the drinking part was because I said, "Look, I want to sit here and talk to Maginnes because he's got such great stories." And so we did. We had a great time. You just talking about the PGA Tour. And I honestly learned so much that night just talking to you about the tour. But the other thing I remember from that weekend was Earl Forsey, longtime play-by-play on the radio. He had gone back home and thought he would get back in time. He didn't. He couldn't get through the snow. And so they asked me, they said, "Hey, do you want to host?" And I said, "I'd love to, but I have a basketball game today."
All right.
And I was like, "This is a great opportunity, but I can't." And then I asked what they did, and they said, "Well, Maginnes basically did 6 hours by himself, and he was fabulous." So I wasn't stunned, though.
Well, let's just say that because we were stranded in a hotel for several days before we got on the air, I wasn't exactly mentally prepared for the 6-hour solo session, but it was great. I mean, the memories of the beginning of PGA Tour Radio, I remember telling people what I did, and they're like, "People listen to golf on the radio?" And here we are 20 years later, and last April, at least 20 times Mike Tirico said, "And down to Amen Corner and John Maginnes." That's how far we've come. When Mike Tirico, he's an NBC guy. He's never going to get the CBS Masters gig, but he loves the Masters. He loves golf. How can he do it? Well, he can do it on the radio with us, and that's what he's done the last couple of years. That's where this has evolved to, which is really, really cool, especially when you think back to, getting to the studio and, pretending to be in San Diego because that was the easiest way to do it. And yeah, it's really cool to see the evolution of it all.
Yeah, it's really kind of always have a little bit of pride there when I go back in and check in with the folks and you guys doing all the majors. And it's wonderful being a very, very small piece of that. But I can say I'm a PGA Tour Network alumni. So that's kind of fun. John, we'll get a little deeper into that as we go along in the show. But we always like to start kind of back at the beginning. You were, I believe, the youngest of 4 kids growing up in Durham, North Carolina. And the question that I have to ask for you, it's been your lifelong career. How'd you get into golf?
My older brother, he's 2 years older than me, Philip. He's actually a neighbor of mine. We live in the same town now. Basically we played golf. Our father was a huge golfer. And I think Philip was probably 11 or 12 and I was 2 years younger. And one summer our dad said, "You could be good at baseball. You can be good at golf. But there's only time in the summer to do one of the two. You can't go from a baseball tournament to try to go to a golf tournament. It's just not going to work. You have to pick one." And my brother chose golf. So I wanted to be where he was. So I chose golf. I can't imagine what my parents would have done if we'd have chosen different sports. But and then from then on, right from there, somewhere that summer, I became obsessed and kind of got nuts. And the pro at our club, and I believe he was a great old pro. I believe he told me that if I was going to make it to the PGA Tour, I had to hit 1,000 golf balls a day. I think he said that to get me out of the pro shop. I don't think he ever imagined that I was actually going to go hit 1,000 golf balls a day. But that's what it did. That's what I did as often as I possibly could. And, in 1996, 1995 in the fall, I got my card and was a rookie on the tour in 1996. And we all know what happened a little bit later that summer when Tiger won his third U.S. Amateur and then came out and took the PGA Tour by storm. So it was really cool to be in the spots that I was in along the way to get to witness the things that I got to witness. I didn't put my mark on the game the way that I imagined on that driving range hitting those 1,000 golf balls a day, but I still get to be a part of it, and I got to see a whole lot of incredible history.
Most definitely. And John, you kind of made a pragmatic decision when it came to college. You chose East Carolina, and you're a Durham kid, so you're in the middle of the triangle there. Obviously, Wake Forest is just down the road, but I believe from what I've heard, it was just kind of because you wanted to get out there on the course, right?
Well, that's the thing. College golf, everything is different now, but one thing that's the same is that if you're a decent player and go to a really good school, yes, you may get better, but you're going to get better at home because you're not going to crack into that travel squad. And my thought was, well, look at where East Carolina plays. They play Duke's tournament. They play Chapel Hill's tournament. They play State's tournament. They play Clemson's tournament. They play Wake Forest tournament. So I get to play against all those guys, even though I'm not good enough to be on one of their teams or to start on one of their teams. And it was a really good decision. I had a coach there, an old school coach, who recognized that I was going to do the work myself and let me be on my own. Didn't really bother me when I showed up at practice hungover. He let me grow into it, which was nice, and I thought very wise of him. And I got to play against David Duvall at Georgia Tech, and later on Stuart Sink and Len Matisse at Wake Forest, and the list goes on and on of the guys that I got to see up close and said, okay, I can get better to be as good as this guy, or I can get better to be as good as this guy. For me, it was the perfect decision because I was at a place that that I always felt like being an underdog, but I got to play, in the big game every week.
Yeah, you ended up being part of, I believe, the all CAA, whatever team, I guess, all 30th anniversary, all that. And your college career, what was it like for you? I know it's an interesting story because obviously you were competitive, especially later in your career. You also had a year where you had a year off as well. So that kind of had to factor into, I'm sure, your focus. Kind of walk me through how that college career went for you.
Well, I played freshman year and I played well. At the end of freshman year, my father died suddenly, and that throws an 18-year-old kid into a tailspin. And my whole life had been about golf and had been about my golf and my father. As a matter of fact, the last time I saw him was after the final round of the spring tournament in Chapel Hill. He'd come to watch the final round and gave a hug in the parking lot and told him I'd see him in a few weeks when school was over, and that was it. And so I didn't even touch a club for the rest of that summer. I don't think. I think you know what? I think I played the North Carolina Amateur, and that was it. And then I decided that it wasn't in the cards for me. I didn't really want to play golf anymore. And I mean, I had some strange jobs in there, Jeremy. I ran a jackhammer. I made sandwiches at a place called Mr. Hoagie. If you ate at Mr. Hoagie back in the late 80s, I'm really sorry. I didn't know what I was doing. But then sometime in the spring, 10 months later, I went and played golf with some of the boys on the team, and it sort of rekindled the fire in me. And more than that, it really pushed me to get better. My entire life, I'd hit a hook. And I said, well, if I'm going to get better, if I'm going to play like the best players I've seen, I'm going to have to learn how to hit a fade. And I learned how to hit a fade and how to release it and hit a fade. I know I'm getting technical. And later that summer, I qualified for my first U.S. Amateur. And then in the fall, at the first tournament in the fall, I won my first college tournament up in Greensboro at Guilford College tournament. So it snowballed into playing in the U.S. Amateur the next 3 years, starting every match for ECU for the next 3 years. It turned a negative into a positive. Of course, I mean, even to this day, 40 years later, I miss my father, but I think he would have liked what happened those next few years, because it could have gone the other way. Could have easily gone the other way, especially in a place like East Carolina, where whatever level of debauchery you're interested in, it's available.
Oh, I have some friends who went down there. They had a great time down in Greenville. One more thing, John, before we get away from your college years. I was doing some research last night, and you told a story about maybe a kind of golf career defining moment when you worked a summer camp when you were about 20 years old and had some contact with the legendary Peggy Kirk Bell.
Yeah, boy, what a summer that was. And it was a last minute thing. It was the summer, I guess, before my junior year, before my senior year. I'll have to do the math on that. I turned 21 that summer. So anyway, and they called and asked me if I wanted to be a camp counselor. And sure, I'd love to. Well, it just worked out that, I mean, there's all kinds of kids there from all over the country. Kevin Stadler was at this camp. He was 10 years old. And it was awesome. And I had a group of kids in my cabin with me that I was responsible for. I was responsible to get them out the door in the morning and get them back and corralled at night. And that was a fun level of responsibility I had never imagined at that point. But the point of the story and the reason that wherever it is you found it, and by the way, great research, I got to be on the practice tee for 2 weeks with Peggy Kirk Bell, listening to her teach elementary golf to young players, listening to her tell stories at night at dinner about playing in U.S. Opens and her best friend, Babe Zaharias, and, all of the things that defined that moment. I'm still friends with a lot of the people there. We've lost a lot of the people that were there at Pine Needles back in the late 80s, early 90s, but the ones that were there remain. There's a great teaching pro in North Carolina who I've known most of my life, named Chris Harlow, who was the counselor in the next cabin. And when we get together, even now, after all the things that have happened in our lives, we still go back to that summer at Pine Needles, listening to Peggy Kirk Bell teach us how to play golf. And to that point, that the impact that she had on me was significant. The impact she had on Chris was even bigger. He runs the Peggy Kirk Bell Girls Junior Tour now, named it after her because she meant so much to him, and runs basically a junior tour for developing young ladies into fine golfers.
That's awesome. John, you eventually play a few North Carolina amateurs, and it kind of leads you into your pros. Can you kind of tell me how that story went down? And it seems like a very John Maginnes decision. Of course, it worked out very well for you.
Yeah. So there's a guy named Paul Simpson. If you know Paul Simpson, he's a criminal. He's no good. Nobody ever liked him. He is the winningest senior amateur. He's the winningest amateur in the history of the state of North Carolina because he never turned pro. He's the only person to win the U.S. senior, the British senior, and the Canadian senior amateurs all in the same summer. But in 1991, he made a 20-footer on the last hole at Alamance Country Club to beat me by a shot in the North Carolina Amateur. I believe he shot 19 under, I shot 18 under, and Stevie Isley shot 3 under and finished third. I've never forgiven Paul for that, although I have donated a lot to his retirement fund in subsequent rounds of golf since then. That ended on Sunday. A mini tour event started on Thursday down at the beach. And I was like, you know what? If I can't beat them, I'm going to turn pro. I'd been considering it anyway. And I went and wrote a check for the entry fee because basically, mini tour golf is organized gambling. The purse is funded by the players. You write a check and then split it up at the end. Then I won $1,800. I won the golf tournament and won $1,800. And so a week into my professional career, I finally won a golf tournament. So it took a while from there, 5 more years to get to the tour, but it was a fun 5 years. It was an adventurous 5 years.
You did mini tour golf. You end up on the Corn Ferry back then, the Hogan Tour. And I've heard in research and watching videos, you talk about the camaraderie of that tour where, you know, everyone's kind of in this together. Kind of talk about what it was like, kind of scrapping for that ultimate dream.
So there's little pods of players on the PGA Tour who are bound by the journey. And for me, it's the guys, particularly in 94 and 95 that I played, what was, I think, the Nike Tour then with, because we traveled together. Our wives knew each other. Our families were growing and we got to know each other. I loved it. It was awesome. Jerry Kelly was part of that group. Dave Stockton Jr., Stuart Appleby, Steve Stricker. The list goes on and on. And actually, this is the Holiday in Sioux Falls behind me. I'm here doing the PGA Tour Champions event with a lot of those guys. I'm doing the Golf Channel coverage, and a lot of those guys are still playing. I sat and had lunch with some of them yesterday. It's such a blast because, you know, there's a special kind of struggle playing the mini tours. Broke, hitting it poorly, having to come up with a round of golf to pay the rent to continue to the next tournament. And, you know, people fall by the wayside all the time in that situation because, let's face it, there's just not enough spots. I mean, there's 125 exempt players on the PGA Tour. There's another 50 that come in each year. You throw in medical exemptions and a few other things, you get up to around 200 players. And then you start doing the math, comparing it to other sports. And you've got a much better, I had a better chance of making it to the NBA, Jeremy, is what I'm saying. That's not true, but there are more players in the NBA than there are guys on the PGA Tour. There's more starting pitchers in baseball, not the bullpen, just the starters.
Yep.
5 a team, 30 teams, that's 150. It's fortunately we didn't know those odds, but when you look at it with those odds and you get to the ultimate goal of making the PGA Tour, you're bound with those guys for the rest of your lives.
You won an event on the Hogan Tour, I believe in San Jose. What was that feeling like?
It was funny because I played great at the end of 94. Had 4 or 5 top 10s in the last handful of events, and I didn't know if I was ever going to win. And I went out to San Jose. My future wife was caddying for me back then, but the ticket was too expensive. It was going to be too expensive to travel her. I got housing. I stayed with a family. Back then. This is 95. They had one TV in the house. They had a VCR. They recorded as many women's college basketball games as they could, and that's what they watched in the evenings. I went to 7 movies that week. Loved them. They were great people, but they made me dinner, and then I'd go to a movie. And I had a guy caddying for me. God love him, who was sleeping in his van. I worked it out with the locker room attendant that he could come in and shower when everybody was gone. And I mean, I just played incredible golf, and I won by 2 or 3. And that was the first tournament of the year. I thought, well, here we go. At the time, that tour took 10 players to the PGA Tour. And I didn't play very well the rest of the year. I didn't play poorly. And at the Tour Championship, I ended up in a playoff with Alan Doyle. And I was like, I don't know, 20th on the money list. And I didn't know if I won, whether or not I would get to the PGA Tour. Mm-hmm. And Alan actually asked in the cart, because he was going to finish second no matter what. Jerry Kelly had won the money list. He said, if Maginnes wins, will he finish in the top 10? And Arvin Ginn, the head official at the time, said, no, he'll finish 11th. And I was, And then Alan put me out of my misery by hitting it 4 feet on the first hole and making birdie to win the playoff, which was nice of him, and led to another adventure, which was I was then exempt to the finals of Q School. This was maybe the first week of October. The last week of November was the finals of Q School. I needed a tournament to play in. I asked my agent to find me somewhere to play. He calls back 2 days later and says, 2 weeks before Q School starts, I can get you into the Uruguayan Open in Montevideo. He said they'll pay your expenses. They'll pay for your airplane and your plane ticket and your hotel. I said, all right, I'm in.
Wow.
I get down there. You know, I don't know how long the flight is, but it's a really long flight, 10 hours or 11 hours. And then you got to commute over to Montevideo. I'm expecting there to be somebody at the airport to pick me up. It's before cell phones, before really the internet. And I get out to the curb and there's nobody there. I've got the big travel bag, the big suitcase. I don't know the name of the golf course. I don't know the name of the hotel. I mean, surely there was a piece of paper somewhere that I had it written down on, but, and so I'm sitting there for 15, 20, 25 minutes. And this guy comes out and he looks at me, he says, you pro golf? I said, yeah, I'm pro golf. He said, you need a ride? I said, I need a ride. He said, I go to golf course. You come. I said, okay. He said, I Carlos. And that's how I met Carlos Franco, who 3 years later, I would play with Carlos Franco and Rich Beam in Hawaii in both of their first events on the PGA Tour. It just, like I said, the stories they compound. And I played pretty well that week in the Uruguayan Open and went to Florida and got my PGA Tour card the next week or 2 weeks later. So it worked out great.
That's awesome, John. Quick question for you. I heard that there was maybe a benefactor for you when you were kind of struggling your way through the mini tours and you were worried about sponsorship and all the things that entail to play your best golf. Can you tell me about how that kind of worked in your favor and got you enough money to kind of get your feet steady and play good enough golf to keep advancing?
There were a couple of guys who over the years helped me. I didn't have like the big sponsorship group that a lot of guys had, and they raised $100,000 to cover their expenses. But I had a few guys that were kind enough to help out along the way. And what it taught me, and certainly what I've come to realize now later on in life, is if you can help, you should help. If whatever it is. I mean, a guy named Mr. Berger, he said, I heard you needed help. I don't want any legal entanglements here, but I'd like to help with the cause. And he wrote me a check for $5,000. And I told him, I'll pay you back someday. Then he said, no, pay it forward someday. He said, when you make it, there'll be somebody that needs your help. You give them the help. How do you even wrap your brain around that at 22? But at 56, it's very clear how you wrap your brain around that. So, there were others, Keith Hall, Bob Mazurek, not names of anybody that you ever heard, but they were the ones who saw potential. And I mean, first of all of those people definitely deserve to be acknowledged, but wouldn't have made it without Mama. Mama was the one who probably put up the most money and had the biggest heartache. And it was really cool, years later, to have her walking Pebble Beach while I'm playing on the PGA Tour, to have her walking Shinnecock at the US Open while I'm playing in the US Open. It was cool to see that come all the way around, because it didn't have to go that way.
John, I've always heard about Q School and how just nerve-wracking it is, especially the one to get into the PGA Tour. Your memories of that, and did it help at all that you had been down that road at lower levels before?
Yes. Two stories spring to mind. In 95 at the finals, I ended up the final round, the sixth round. It was 6 rounds back then, 25 spots. I was tied for probably 20th, playing the 9th hole, my 18th hole. and I needed par to get my card, and I knew it. Taylor Smith, who I was playing with, needed bogey to get his card, and I hit a 4-iron from 202 into a crosswind from the left. It started at the left fringe and faded right down the flag. Landed about 12 feet from the hole. And I can't say the exact words that Taylor Smith said when he walked by me, but the gist of it was, and remember, he's from South Georgia. He said, "That's the best shot you've ever hit in your life." Wow, that is the best shot I've ever hit in my life. And actually making the putt, which got me in a couple of extra tournaments on the fall calendar, which was nice. The other one is many years later, I had lost my card. I had to go back to Q school. Got a dear friend caddying for me. I'm way inside the number. I'm like 7th. And there he is. That's Barry right there. I hate to tell this story on you, Barry, but we get finished at Orange County National down there in Orlando. And we're inside having a beer. I finished 7th or 5th, something like that. I mean, it was never in jeopardy. And the 13th and 14th holes, the caddies all went through the woods and met us at the landing area. Big wide fairway. There was woods on the left. And he tells me later, he said, "I've never been as nervous as I was out there on that back nine today." I said, "Really?" He said, "I might have thrown up in the woods on 14. I said, "Dude, by 14, we had it locked." He said, "It didn't feel that way." I said, "Well, I got to tell you, you're one hell of a caddy because you didn't show any signs of panic. Because if you had started panicking, I would have started panicking." And he laughed. He said, "I know." And he went on to caddy for John Rollins in a victory. He caddied for Boo Weekley when he won down in Colonial. Mm-hmm. He has a handful of nice flags signed by the winners on his wall, and he's still at it. He's still caddying. Could be caddying this week. I haven't looked.
John, those early days on the PGA Tour, I know you struggled some. What shook you the most about being in that situation?
I had gotten to the U.S. Open the year before, 95, and I played with Peter Jacobsen in a practice round, and he couldn't have been better trying to make us all feel comfortable. And then, so I'd gotten to at least see the scope of a great big event, and I made the cut that week. I didn't play well on the weekend, but I made the cut in the U.S. Open. That gave me a ton of confidence. And then the West Coast was a shock to me. The grasses, all of the things out there. Hawaii was in the middle of the West Coast schedule, and I finally made the cut at Hawaii, which was huge for the reshuffle and for the priority. But, being in the locker room with your heroes, that's a thing, meeting Payne Stewart and Freddie Couples and all these guys that I've been watching on TV my whole life was shocking. It's funny, the guys who, like, back then, Mr. Nicholas was Mr. Nicholas because I knew Gary, I knew his youngest son. So it's funny. I wasn't in awe of him because I knew him, he and Barber, but the other ones, all the other guys. And I heard Rich Beam talking about when he finally got comfortable being on the PGA Tour. I'm not so sure that even by 2004 and 2005, I ever felt like I completely belonged out there. I feel like I belong now doing what I'm doing, but just I never really had the confidence that my game was as good as the comparison. I was one of those players, and I've said this many times before. I was one of those players that my life was going to make sense if I got a little bit better or a little bit worse. And unfortunately, it went the wrong way, Jeremy.
Well, some would say it went the right way. But before we get off of your playing career, John, I know early on, one of those early highlights for you was that you played with Tiger at the BC Open, and one of his, I believe, early starts on tour. What are your memories about teeing it up with a guy who even back then everyone said this is the next big thing?
Well, we didn't believe it. We didn't even want to like him. We'd heard he'd signed for $10 million with Nike. That was a mind-boggling amount of money for us. We couldn't even wrap our brains around it. But he had Fluff caddying for him. And I told you that in 95, I played a practice round with Peter Jacobsen. Well, Peter had Fluff on the bag. So Fluff and I got to be friends, which was great. And I've told this story in various forums. And apparently James Patterson, the famed fiction writer, has just written a book about Tiger called Tiger Tiger. Another unauthorized biography, I'm guessing, because I don't think that James and Tiger are tight. But he told this story. I told this story, and it's written down verbatim in the book. So I'll tell it here, and and somebody else can steal it. The third hole was a par 5. The first 2 par 4s were short. Third hole is par 5. Tiger actually pulls his tee ball into the trees, and it does kick out into the fairway. I've got ripped one right down the right center, and I've got about 240 to the front. That's the maximum I can hit my 3-wood. So I've got it right where I want it, where I can try to run it on the front of the green, or maybe even land it on the green. Tiger's 35 yards behind me. There's no way that he's going for it. And then he pulls an iron out of the bag. So he's laying up to a number, obviously. And he made the hardest golf swing I had ever seen. The ball hitting the club made a sound I had never heard before. And the ball went out and it rose and then it leveled off. Well, that was normal for those softballs back then. But then it did this and it rose again. It looked like it sped up too, but that would be physically impossible. And it landed about 2 steps onto the front of the green. Now, Tiger weighed, 145 pounds at the time? As soon as he hit it, he knew, and he was gone. He was walking after it as fast as he could. Fluff's just sitting there admiring it, and I'm standing there in shock, and I looked at Fluff, and I said, "What the F was that?" Now, you have to be careful because you're not allowed to ask what club was that.
Yep.
He's not allowed to tell me. He's not allowed to give advice. But this isn't advice. This is a fact. And he said, "Johnny boy, that's our 2-iron. We carry it 275." I said, "Fluff, I'm averaging 268 off the tee this year." And he said, "Welcome to the Tiger Woods era," and laughed and just kept on going. I loved playing with Tiger for those 2 days. I played well. I was like 8 under. He was like 11 under. I believe Fred Funk went on to win the golf tournament. Tiger took the next week off because he was tired, which was nice because I lost in a playoff to keep my card that week. And then he came back in Vegas and took down the best player in the game in Davis Love that week. And then he went and won Disney, and then he went and won the Tour Championship. And then he was off to the races at that point. But I loved playing with Tiger. I've enjoyed all of my interaction with Tiger. I probably have this job because of Tiger. All these years later, which is really cool.
We'll get back in. Actually, I want to ask you this because I feel like, John, you have a little bit of perspective on this that not a lot of other folks have. We've seen with Caitlin Clark and how she's been transcendent with the WNBA. Tiger was very similar in the way he kind of increased purses. When it came to Tiger, how long did it take folks to warm up to that idea of, look, this dude's going to make us all money? And did it break down by age group where guys that were a little younger realized it quicker before the older guys? Or how did you kind of remember that all breaking down with folks kind of accepting this guy is good for us, even though he might win all the tournaments?
I think that certainly, remember the next year at Augusta in 97, he becomes larger than life. He shoots 40 in the first round, first 9 on Thursday, comes back with 30, goes on to win the Masters by 12. At that point, Nike had already fully run their campaign. And we were at that point quite aware of the fact that this was a force to be reckoned with. We all started going to the gym, for goodness sake, because Tiger went to the gym. It changed everything. We all tried to swing at it. We all tried to get longer, because when I described that 2-iron that Tiger hit in 1997 or 1996, he's the only guy in the world that could hit that shot. There's 75 guys on tour that have that shot now because of training and equipment, but mostly because they watched Tiger do it and said, "I want to do that." And so his impact on the game, it continues to be seen going forward. The direct answer to your question is In 1998, the PGA Tour completed negotiations on their next television package. And so I don't know if it was 99 or 2000, the purses basically doubled. And then in 06, they basically doubled again, or 07. I may have the timeline a little bit off there, but not by much. And now, well, Scotty Scheffler just won $25 million as a bonus. He won $68 million this year on the PGA Tour. That's all Tiger. Every bit of that is Tiger. And, you know, let's not forget that in 15 months, he turns 50. And he has said that he'll play some Champions Tour events. Imagine what that's going to do to the Champions Tour. I mean, there's going to be people who watch the Champions Tour instead of the PGA Tour, which doesn't seem possible, but it seems also very likely considering what we've all seen.
John, you mentioned that 5-man playoff that you lost at the Buick Challenge. How do you think your life's different if you come away with a win that day?
It would definitely have been different in that I would have had a little more confidence. I still would have gotten hurt in 04. I still would have done all of those things. But it would have been it would be a nice thing to hang your hat on. Winning on the PGA Tour, winning 3 times on what's now the Korn Ferry Tour was nice, and I acknowledge that. In terms of my life being different, well, there's some elements of being a life member of the PGA Tour. You have a free membership to all the TPC courses for the rest of your life when you win out there. That would be nice. Although I don't live within 200 miles of the nearest TPC course, but I may have changed that, you know, if things have been different. I would have liked to have seen that putt go in. It lipped out on the bottom lip, and then Michael Bradley made his. Davis Love missed his. Fred Funk missed his. Len Batiste missed his, and Michael Bradley wins the golf tournament. There were other times that I had a chance to. My good buddy Craig Stadler shot 63 at the BC Open a few years after playing there with Tiger. I was in the final group with Alex Chayka, and neither one of us played very well. I think he finished second and I finished fourth. Either one of us should have won that golf tournament. There were chances. Basically, I just wasn't good enough. You know, when at the end of the day, I mean, I still play pretty good golf even now as an old fat man. But you know, the guys that rise to that level, they're really good. And I'm proud of the nearly 200 starts that I made and being vested in the retirement program and all of that stuff. I mean, I've been around a long time anyway.
That you have, John. And you talked about that injury at St. Jude in 2004. What happened, and when did you know that you might have a serious problem?
Well, we knew I'd had elbow issues all year, and it's very easy as a broadcaster to say you can't play hurt on the PGA Tour. It's a different situation to want to stop playing when you're playing. And I sent a bone spur into the tricep tendon at impact on the 15th hole, and it was pretty gross. It's not supposed to go like that, and that was on Friday, and I think I had surgery on Tuesday. I mean, it was the size of a cantaloupe for several days. And the bursa sac, all the things. And Dr. Ballin, who played on the PGA Tour in the 70s, came to the conclusion that this was not his life stream, went back and went to medical school at Duke, became an orthopedic surgeon. He was actually the PGA Tour surgeon of record and did the surgery. He did a great job. But what he told me was that he had to take a significant amount of the tricep tendon that was all scar tissue, and that if my career was going to continue, that I would need Tommy John surgery, and that would be a 2-year recovery. And I was like, well, what if I don't get that done? What if I just leave it the way it is? He said, well, you'll have range of motion issues and you'll never be able to hit it very far again. But otherwise, you won't have any problems. I said, I think I'll become a broadcaster. Actually, what I said was, I think I'll become an insurance agent. The broadcasting thing came around later.
I remember I saw that you talking about the insurance agent. So I guess my question would be, that was what you were considering, but did you make that decision pretty quickly after you got that diagnosis, or was there a lot of kind of hemming and hawing and some depression you had to get through?
No, I had to make a living. I had 2 small kids. I needed to work. And my buddy said, get your insurance license and we can put you to work immediately. And I went to Raleigh. I got the insurance license, took the test. Turns out I could still read after 15 years of professional golf. And I was going to go to work for him. He's still my insurance agent, as it turns out. And I get a phone call from my agent, and he said, do you have any interest in filling in on USA Network, who used to have the Thursday, Friday coverage of PGA Tour events, for 2 weeks? And I said, not really. I don't want to be a broadcaster. And he said, well, hang on a second before you jump to a decision. The first week is the Senior Players Championship in Dearborn, Michigan. I can fly you in Wednesday afternoon. You're going to work from 4 to 6 on Thursday, 4 to 6 on Friday. I can fly you out Friday night. They'll put you up at the Ritz-Carlton and pay you $5,000. I could probably make time for a couple of nights at the Ritz-Carlton to make a little bit of money. And the second week was the Buick Open in Flint, Michigan. And now that's a CBS event. So Lance Barrow is the producer in my headset for CBS on the Thursday, Friday coverage. And I walked the last 6 holes with Tiger, of course, because he's defending champion inevitably. And we go to scoring, and I'm told to interview Tiger. And now, you got to remember, this is the last 15 minutes of my broadcast career, this illustrious 2-week broadcast career that I've had. And I mean, I was too dumb to know better and too brash to care. So the question, while Lance Barrow is telling me to ask Tiger, what do you have to do to win the golf tournament on the weekend? The question that came out of my mouth was, Tiger, we all know you're getting married soon. How's that going to affect your fishing? I know. And he started laughing. And then he told a story about he and Elin discovering spearfishing down in the islands and going spearfishing, and how, there's trust involved, there's blood in the water. They had some places that they like to go fishing and blah, blah, blah. Incidentally, and he was great. And I said, Tiger, play great this weekend. Thanks. Back up to you guys. And it was Bill McAtee and John Cook in the booth. John Cook, who I'm working with this week, by the way, 20 years later. And he said, Cookie said, somebody needs to give Maginnes a job. And when I got back to the TV compound, Kevin Landy, the guy who hired me, said, can you work with us the next 11 weeks? That's how many weeks there were left. And I said, I sure can. And that's how it happened. Never sold one policy. And I'm pretty sure that I don't remember anything about the test. And I'm pretty sure my license expired a long time ago. So this is it. This is what I'm stuck with.
Well, John, you're such a good broadcaster. You answered like 3 questions I was going to ask you in that response, but a follow-up on that one, you do mention before, I've seen that Kevin Landy gave you some really good advice in your broadcasting career.
He said to treat it like well, let's just say maybe during those 11 weeks, I didn't give it the same attention that I should have. And Kevin pulled me aside and said, John, you have a chance to make a career of this if you want to. If you don't, I get it. But if you do, give it the same attention you gave your golf career. Learn everybody's name, learn what it's like. He said, and I think you're going to find that you really like being on a team. And he was 100% right. We've been teammates. I've been teammates with some of the best in the business at this point. And it's a lot more comfortable life than playing mediocre golf, than being a marginal tour player, because that comes with an awful lot of angst. The only thing angsty about this business is, are you going to get to keep your job? Is there new things you don't have control over? When you're playing, you feel like you have control and you have no control. Maybe that's the way life really is anyway.
John, it's interesting to me when you say that you didn't really want to be a broadcaster when they came to you, because I've heard that you were a great talker on tour. You're one of those guys that always would talk to everybody. So in your mind, did you not kind of see where there could be an easy transition of you were comfortable talking to people on a golf course, you were comfortable getting to know guys as well, which is half the battle when it comes to broadcasting?
Yeah, yes and no. Part of the thing was there was such a small group of people. I mean, it was Faraday and McCord. You know, it was those guys, and uh, there was Johnny Miller's crew, and then that small little USA Network crew. There weren't really opportunities. Golf Channel was very young. They didn't even have rights to most PGA Tour events at that point. They obviously have had them ever since '07. But you know, it didn't look like there was going to be opportunity, and my timing couldn't have been better, Jeremy. I mean, I started in '04. Well, in '05, PGA Tour Radio was born. And so now there's multiple opportunities, and I got to be on the second week of broadcast for PGA Tour Radio in 2005. So, uh, and now look, there's PGA Tour Live, there's World Feeds, there's more opportunities now than there's ever been. So while my timing on the PGA Tour wasn't as great as it could have been, because you know if I'd waited and been 10 years younger, I would have made an awful lot of money. My timing in broadcasting couldn't have been better because there's been nothing but opportunity after opportunity since then.
John, I remember obviously when I used to work on the channel, listening to you guys and catching tournaments, I always felt like you were just a phenomenal booth analyst because of the fact that you combine your knowledge of the game, but also you were one of those guys that could tell stories and talk and make it funny and those type of things. But also you do work as a course rover and you're good at that too. Which one do you like better?
So you feel more a part of the action when you're on the golf course. Uh, the way that the game has evolved since I started in this business with, uh, I mean, the statistical analysis is beyond comprehension for most people, whether it's ball speeds and smash factors or strokes gained this or strokes gained that. And now it's incumbent upon the guy sitting in the analyst chair to not only be up to date on all that, we're all pretty much up to date on it, but to then disseminate that information in a way that the average golf fan can understand it. I admire them for that. I like being able to tell you that this looks like a hot lie from 184 yards, but he's gonna try to hit a flyer 9-iron there, and you know I enjoy that. I get told I'm wrong a lot, you know, because the agents are all watching or the caddies, and they'll be like, "Man, you missed that one back there." Okay, I got one wrong. I'll admit it. I'm a human, but then again, being out there in the action, walking the fairways is pretty cool. I feel like when I'm out there walking inside the ropes and there's 5,000 people following a group, I'm getting paid to do what they paid money to do. You know,
Yep.
They're doing the same thing I'm doing. They're walking and talking about the golf shots they're seeing, and I'm getting paid for it. That's pretty good.
John, one of your big parts of your career now is your radio show every day, every weekday on PGA Tour Radio. And I'm trying to get the timeline because I know I was transitioning away. The channel kind of made it a little more open for guys to have more chances to do shows. I believe you did the show solo first. And
Yes.
then Brian Katrick, you guys came together. And John, I will say this because I actually became a pretty avid listener when I was doing some traveling to your show. And I'm not a huge golf guy, but I always kind of compared it to you were this really good Karl Malone power forward. And then when Katrick showed up as your John Stockton, you guys made magic together. Is that kind of the way you felt about your pairing?
I love the comparison. Yes. Basically, SiriusXM decided to expand the channel, to create a full slate of talk programming, and I was the afternoon host, and Brian was one of the mid morning hosts. And while they were looking to, basically they were just going to start from scratch, and we're like, well, we're really good. We could do a show together, and they gave us, I don't know, a couple of months trial, and they saw what you saw, what you just said there. They enjoyed what they were hearing. It's, you know, I thought the name of the show should be Idiots in the Afternoon, but they decided to go with Cater Maginnes on Tap. It's fun. He's as good as anybody in this business. He's been a great partner and lots of fun. And I hope that we get to do it for, 10 or 15, 20 more years.
And interestingly enough, I believe your first producer was Caitlin Mangum North, who actually is high up at Monumental Sports now. So you guys kind of had a dream team going on there.
We did. She was great. And we've been through lots of producers. Mike McCann is our producer now, and he's fantastic. He does the news with us. Yeah, there's been a lot of people go through that studio over the years. She was fantastic. I hope if you see her, tell her I said hello. She was awesome. I reached out to her when my daughter moved to DC, because if you want to know somebody in DC, she's a pretty good person to know.
John, a couple more for you. I wanted to ask, I was watching, I believe it was that same podcast you did down at Pine Needles, where you talked about you still go and play the Senior Open qualifier every year, and you kind of never seem to have time to do it. It's too far away. You're doing a golf broadcast, but why do you still kind of chase that dream of getting out there on the course for a Senior Open?
I think because I played, all the USGA events I was eligible for, going back to 3 USAMs and 4 US Opens. I don't know that I'd feel comfortable if, a Champions Tour event gave me a sponsor exemption. I feel like, there's guys out there trying to make a living who are more deserving, but to qualify for the US Senior Open, and I almost did this year. I feel like if I had known the golf course, because I didn't get a chance to play a practice round, but I did show up and shoot my 72 on whatever day of the week it was. It was almost good enough. It looked like it was going to be good enough the way I was playing with 5 holes left to go, but the rust kicked in. I think that I probably have legitimately 4 or 5 more chances before I can't get it done anymore.
We wish you good luck on that. And the last one I'll ask you, John, because I think it's always interesting. I've got a few friends that kind of have children in different age ranges. They've got about 10 years apart. You're in that spot where you have your 2 older kids who I remember you talking about back in the day when we were doing events, and you started up a new family with your wife, you got married about 5 years ago, I believe. And then you've got, I believe, 2 young ones now. How have you kind of reconciled your career and look back on what you were doing as a parent when you were trying to make a living every week to something now where you have a little more comfortability, I guess was the best word to say, when it comes to your income? How have you kind of reconciled that with your kids?
So I have a 25-year-old, a 23-year-old, and an almost 5-year-old, and at this point, 3-month-old. So, yeah, those are the older ones. Several years ago. In Jackson, Denver, Sophie's in DC. It was great being their parents. They're high achieving kids, but to get to do it over again, I was terrified of the prospect, and now I can't imagine my life any other way. I think it's the way that it's supposed to go. I have 2 little boys. One of them is an absolute terrorist, and the other one's a terrorist in training. And it couldn't be more fun. I hope that I learned from the first 2 how to be even better with the next 2. And the older kids, they're great. And I told them, look, this is your fault. If you guys had just decided to turn me into a grandfather, I wouldn't have had to go do this. But and they laugh and think that's funny, and then tell me, no, you're probably never going to be a grandfather. So it's just the way that kids are these days. But I get the best of both worlds, which is nice. I get to travel with this job, and just a few weeks ago was in Denver for the week with my oldest, and we played golf and hung around and got to spend some really cool time together. And he's an Ironman, Jeremy. I mean, for goodness sake, he did a full Ironman last year. He does crazy bike races, and it's always fun to hear about. We don't have a lot in common, as you might imagine. Music, and he's discovered golf. So, you know, we're getting better. My daughter's just fantastic, and she comes and visits because I live at the beach now, so she likes to come visit. You know, I have access to boats and live at the beach. That'll keep her coming for a while.
Well, that's awesome. I know your new wife has gotten you into yoga. You told me beforehand, hey, can we move this so I can get to my yoga class in? So we know you're an evolving man, John Maginnes.
This fat man right here owns Port City Power Yoga, Wilmington, North Carolina. Come see us. I mean, she owns it, but I get to go there.
Well, you're doing some great stuff as always, John. It's so good to talk to you. Glad to catch up after what's been too long of a time. Hopefully won't be as long the next time. John Maginnes, thank you so much for joining Huber and Friends.
What an honor.